On today's episode of the Glue Guys, we're going to talk about the uneven weekend that the Brooklyn Nets had. Some highs, some lows, and some middles. Plus, if we get desperate, I do have some Kyrie Irving trade possibilities. There's some context that we need to discuss, though, leading into it.
Oh, we'll get desperate, Mike. If I have anything to do with it.
Welcome back to the Glue Guys. This is Mike Airsail O'Brien. Check us out on Twitter at BK Glue Guys, Netsdaily.com, The Athletic. Get yourself behind that paywall at theathletic.com/glue guys. Ryan?
Michael, are we back?
The Nets
Are we?
are disappointment.
It's your call. I can't tell. It's sort of back. It's somewhere. It's had we beaten beaten the Bulls last night.
Beating the Bulls.
That would have been.
Yeah.
We'd have been real back. We just sort of expected to lose that game though, and isn't that sort of an indicator of where we feel like this team is, Mike? Let's get into it. Let's get into the.
Well, tell me. You seem to have a thought about it. Where is this team? They had won 5 in a row going into that Bulls game. I think we should state that loudly and clearly. The Nets had been on a 5-game winning streak.
We've been on a tear. We've been looking good.
Yeah.
Things have been clicking, but at the same time, we sort of I don't know. In my heart of hearts, I felt like everyone was sort of complacent, or not complacent. How to say this exactly? Everyone was
They were prepared to lose that game.
Prepared to lose that game. Yeah.
Yes.
In a certain sense, and then they did, lose steam and not win the game. Second half of a back-to-back. Blah 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 blah, all the things, But at the same time, it's like we had been a team that was the stackedest of all stacked out there, and now we're sort of okay with losing steam in the fourth quarter to a better than expected Bulls team, but by no means a world beater, But that's sort of where we are, Mike. It's kind of.
It's funny that you say they're not a world. I'm super impressed by the Bulls. I am bullish. They had lineups. I mean, they had lineups where pretty much every time on the floor, there was at least 3 guys who could get buckets, real shot makers. DeMar DeRozan, while he isn't a 3-point shooter, gets buckets. Levine, obviously, he was actually 0 for 4 from 3, but he's an elite scorer. Vucevic, who is the classic guy that actually kills the Nets in this game, did really well rebounding.
Yeah.
But didn't kill the team in the normal there's just a lot. Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, Ayo Dosunmu, who was like a spark plug.
Did you watch him at the end of the game where he had a cheeky he just basically full court pressed with 20 seconds left to go and a 20-point blowout and got super hyped on it, but to then just get inbound the ball and then run out the clock for them? It's all right guys. But anyways, that's all well and good. I'm just less it's a good start and they look great. But I think in terms of world beaterness, I've now come to this stupid Skip Bayless side of the thing where it's elite bucket getters are actually, there's a pretty significant tier system there. Zach LaVine's there, but that's kind of their only one, and he's still sort of an unproven commodity down the line. But dude, that guy is really good. He was every shot he takes, he gets tons of separation on that fadeaway. He's got a real weapon now, a go-to weapon that is working. So he's got it. He's figured it out. But I think they're in need of just a couple. I don't think that you said DeRozan's his walking bucketness is still sort of up for debate for me. He doesn't have enough in the bag to be that echelon. But anyways, that's not the point. You just
Well, I mean, I think he's proven that if anything, he is a walking bucket. He's been scoring 27 points a game per game this year, and he's averaged over 20 points a game, dating all the way back to the 2013
empty calories, Mike. You know those are empty cals.
Let's not, Brian, this is a bad take, but I'm just going to say this. If anyone is a walking bucket in the NBA, it's DeMar DeRozan. That's the thing that he does. That's the only thing he does.
My definition has changed now that I've watched.
What is your definition of a walking bucket?
Anything else is
that's unfair.
is beneath him. So I've become.
But who cares? This isn't a Bulls podcast.
Shut up,
don't
guys.
Give a crap about the Bulls.
Shut up, Brian and
Mike. By the way, I'm looking at the advanced box score of the Nets Bulls game, and I don't know if this is a glitch or if this is in fact the truth. They have individual offensive and defensive rating for players, and that is a fraught statistic. It's not actually like, if you listen to Seth Partnow, who used to be the head of analytics for the Milwaukee Bucks, he's a co-host on the Athletic NBA show, their Nerder She Wrote pod. He says individual offensive and defensive ratings, I believe this is what he states, are a crock of S. But Bruce Brown had a 0 offensive rating in that Bulls game. That's not good. A 0 offensive rating, it means you didn't do anything. Bruce Brown shot 0 of 8 from the field. He only took 1 3-pointer. He didn't get to the free throw line. He took 8 shots, missed them all, had 0 assists. So essentially on offense, besides screens, which he was a devastating force screening, he did nothing. How big of a deal, Brian? I feel like I know your answer. How big of a deal should we be making of this Bulls game? Because the other 5 wins leading into this game were against not really impressive teams. The Hawks was a big win. Toronto had been playing well, but the Pistons are bad. The Pacers not at full strength, and then they played the Pistons twice. How big of a deal should we make of this loss against the Bulls?
It's not. I mean, there's something there. It's not a big deal, grand scheme of things, but it does. Like I was saying to begin, like I think there is something indicative about our ceilingness, this regular season ceiling. Like if we go out and beat the Bulls on this night, it suggests like, oh, okay, like we actually have maybe like really clicked on and are locked in, like in all the ways that that the sports analysts will tout. And I mean, it's not to say that we haven't been looking awesome. Like like you were saying, 5-game winning streak, and I expect that the rest of this road trip will also have lots of wins associated with it. So it's like by no means any concern. I'm not at all concerned, but there's a little bit of like, we're just maybe one Kyrie Irving away from having no problem winning that game as well, and that's, I guess that's my only takeaway. It was just like, we were prepared to lose, and why? Why have we become complacent in that way? If we're trying to be the Death Star in the NBA, which I don't think we can argue that we are anymore.
Yeah, I think the Death Star, if we're any sort of weapon from some sci-fi fantasy movie, we're not the Death Star anymore. The Nets just really aren't.
We're a Star Destroyer, one of many, one of a few, and sure, they're a problem, but not prohibitively a problem for the rest of the universe.
Yeah, and our engines can fail, and we dive spear first, into another Death Star. That's potentially our fate.
True. True.
No, without Kyrie Irving, the Nets, while still a title contender, maybe still the favorites in the East, aren't the devastating force. I think that's just been clearly proven out, because what we've already discovered in this season. So Patty Mills really hasn't. He's had a few good games, but he hasn't been consistent. Part of the problem with them so far this season is that, and I love Patty Mills. He's averaging 10 points per game, 3 assists. His field goal percentage is 42% from the field. He's shooting 47% from 3. So he is having a high efficiency from 3, but his 2-point percentage is down to 32% on 2s, which is dramatically lower than he's ever been in his career. He's always been around about the 48% mark in his career. Patty Mills hasn't been consistent. There's Bruce Brown will have games where he scores and then games where he goes 0 for 8. Blake Griffin will have games where he's super impactful and then completely fade away.
Yeah.
LaMarcus Aldridge has been pretty good. No one could take shots.
He's the lone source of consistency in the
yes.
bench. Yeah.
And it's hard if it's all on Harden, who's still coming back from injury, we're told. The longest hamstring injury in the history of the NBA.
Those hammies are tough. That's a tough one to come back from.
That's a tough ham hock right there.
Nice.
But this team isn't the devastating force that we're led to believe. I'm not discouraged by the Bulls game in the least bit. How can we be? It was a back-to-back. We said it.
Yeah, it's fine. But like, don't you think just hidden beneath the surface there is a little kernel of doubt that's sown from those types of losses?
Well, I think it's if we can stitch together a larger narrative, which, and this has been discussed many times before, the Nets shot the ball 86 times from the field, and the Bulls shot the ball 98 times. They got 12 more shots from the field than the Nets did, and that's consistent over the season so far. I would guess that probably pretty much every game so far this year, except for those Pistons games, the Nets shot the ball fewer times from the field than the other team. That's because they aren't a good rebounding team, and mostly because they're still turning over the ball too much. And James Harden will have like a random like 7 turnover game.
Yeah.
Also, and that makes it really hard.
One thing about Harden too that I've noticed, and I forget. I don't know. Some podcast was listening to talked about how fast Lowry brings the ball up to get into their offensive set for the Heat. And I forget who it was. I really should credit this, but I'm not going to remember. Was basically saying they've done like some interesting like analyses of like the downstream benefits of bringing the ball up faster, and there are like so many downstream benefits. Like you get like a bunch of just good things happen when you get into your offensive set faster, more second chance points, more opportunities to pick up like like fouls and things like that. It's just like generally better for everyone. And like every time Harden just barely gets it over the half court line with 16 seconds to go on the clock. And I just wonder like, how much of these like that's a weird thing to pick up on. It's like a weird thing to pinpoint. And but it is like part of, I think, the greater sort of like macro issue with the team is just like there is both like a comfort level. Like they're trying to inspire themselves around defense, but for me, like, and that's fine. That seems to be clicking in a way that it kind of wasn't last year. Like people like this whole
100%
blue collar thing is cool, but I'm actually have more issues with the offense weirdly this season than I ever had before, and it's just like mostly because I can't think of when I think of the Nets offense. All I think of is Kevin Durant, and I don't have much, and it's his like basically ISO game, and I haven't really conceived of like what is their identity beyond that. Like it's James Harden finding his way is the other part of the identity, which is a shit identity. That's not one I like.
Yeah, and like after we talked about this after the Hawks game, the role players play great in that game, and Joe Harris said after the game that I think it was the Hawks game that the ball was moving, we're making the extra pass and all that. That's been rarer than what we usually see, which is like a little more ISO heavy, less movement, kind of like really depending on LaMarcus Aldridge to bail out. Like if KD and Harden aren't getting the shot, it's like, hey, LaMarcus, can you hit an 18-footer? And that's been fantastic this year. And I'm already feeling like we're having this discussion. This is the classic after a loss vibe, right? I think if we did a segment, Dr. Oz, and we did positives and negatives, which we could certainly do, I think there are more positives. The team is 7-4. They had been riding again a 5-game win streak. Kevin Durant, we don't say this enough, has been absolutely ascendant. He is back to exactly what he was before his Achilles injury. If not, he says himself that he's different. I'm not going to say he's better. Like that's almost impossible to believe that anyone could be better than what he was, but he's the best player in the NBA. Ultra efficient, devastating scorer, can get to any spot he wants to on the floor. His athleticism is not a problem at all. Remember when the conversation was he'll be like Dirk. He'll be late stage Dirk. Yeah. Is what he could be post his Achilles injury. All respect due to the flying German, but KD's a little bit better than late stage Dirk.
He's a little better. Yeah. And also you bring up a good point. Like the Raptors win was just this one time you did. The Raptors win was like the best win of the season. I think it feels that way. And like just because it was like that's a scrappy team at home, which they take super serial, and they had every reason to like get inspired to win that game. And we just kind of shut it down in a way that a good team does. It felt like the kind of gutsy win that good teams do against other good teams, and like kind of coasted to like a 10-point win towards the end. Like really kept the pressure away from them. So like if we had potted yesterday, this would be a very different podcast, Mike. That would be totally different because that was a good win, and like we were saying, like we had sort of prepared our bodies for the disappointment of going into this Bulls game and probably running out of gas. Kevin Durant playing back-to-backs though, Mike, which is interesting and good to see. You love to see it. Yeah.
I mean, and James Harden. And as much discussion as there is about these hamstrings, the most famous hamstrings in the greater five borough area, he continues to play big minutes. He's averaging about 34 minutes per game this year, which, he had in his career had gone up to 38 at one point, but he was 26 years old. Now he's 32. 34 minutes a game is a lot. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break. Coming back, I do want to have a little bit more of a James Harden discussion because I feel a seesaw effect that's happening online that we need to discuss.
Let's do that.
And we're back, Brian.
Oh,
wow. So James Harden, and we could do this every episode. We could assess and analyze and see where he is. Sort of the inspiration for this segment is, I don't know why I'm allowing this person to get under my skin so much, but Nick Wright had tweeted a few weeks ago that James Harden is one of the worst players in the NBA, and he continues to point out how bad Harden has looked. And I don't agree fully. I do agree that he's diminished in some capacity. Obviously, the free throw rule change. I mean, he's taking less than 5 free throws per game this year, and he had about a 6-year stretch, really an 8-year stretch, where he's basically hitting 10 or more free throws a game. So drastic change in terms of how impactful he can be. But I just want your scout's eye, Bri.
Okay.
I want the scout's eye. If I were to ask you to be fully honest, I sat you down, strapped that polygraph to you, stripped away your Nets fandom, and just got that scout's eye, what would you say? How is James Harden playing this year?
Oh boy. It's definitely not as Nick Wright describes it, like the worst player in the NBA. That's not true. But it is hard to disagree that there is a percentage of diminishment that he's on. I think he's on everyone's mind in a way that is indicative of a potential lack of faith. It's a weird way to say it, but like I am, every time that he does one of the Harden-esque things that we've come to know from his like highlight reels from the past, you're like, oh great, a Harden thing. Like, and that's a weird way of sort of watching James Harden, whereas maybe last year and before the injury and years prior, it was just completely taken for granted that Harden just did Harden things throughout the course of a game with few lapses in consistency. Now I feel like they're very like concrete moments of Harden things, which is like a weird way of saying like he's on my radar, but it's like, and it's in many ways it's like passing. He's getting a passing grade, but you're still like you're on my radar in a way that you never used to be, and that'll continue, I think, until like I don't know exactly what I need to see happen. But something, do you get what I mean? It's like something needs to change a little bit. Like it's just, I think it's ultimately, if I just put like a KPI behind it, it'd be getting points in the paint. Like that's really, I think, like the big change that seems to. He can't take people off the dribble as consistently as he used to. If you switch off a Chris Boucher onto him, he can take him off the dribble. But if you get like a rangier wing that's more stretch 3 or 4-ish, someone that's a little bit more mobile, he's not getting around him in the way that he used to, which I guess we're all going to attribute to the hamstring. Fine, good. I guess that's going to come back online at some point, we're led to believe. But in lieu of that, having him not be able to be the gravity-pulling dribble drive force that he used to be it's a big change. It is a fundamentally big change.
Yeah, and there was like, Nets Twitter is a fantastic place. Every time Harden doesn't get a foul call, you get the clip immediately on Twitter and people yelling about how is that not a foul. But there was a moment in the Bulls game where I forget who was defending him, but basically clotheslined Harden as he was going to the hoop, and there was no foul call. Like straight, like ripped across his arms and his chest.
Yeah.
And Harden wasn't able to get off the shot. And he doesn't get the foul call. And Nash has talked about this. It's a huge deal. The guys in the NBA referees manual, the virtual manual that I'm sure that they pointed out as saying, these are irregular basketball moves and don't allow foul calls on these. They're showing Trae Young and James Harden. I guarantee it. And so all these refs are attuned to the fact that when I referee Harden, I'm just not going to give him I'm not even going to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's almost like, you know how classically in the NBA, stars get calls.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually the opposite for James Harden at this point. He is being negatively treated
Do you think
because of his former success.
the film room is like, it's like Clockwork Orange style? They're just showing like images of, and then their cognitive biases are just completely overloaded with James Harden footage of him doing the worst of the worst, trolling for fouls. Is that
I imagine it's a mix of Clockwork Orange and The Matrix. Like all referees are all wearing their like gray and black little uniform, and they're strapped into the seats.
Yeah.
And there's a cord plugged into the back of their head.
Sure.
And they're just seeing, you know, like now they know Kung Fu. They're just seeing calls constantly, and now finally realize, oh, James Harden was doing a lot of bullshit before, and now we can't let him happen.
But I think the primer of just seeing a lot of James Harden in the like infraction footage is what we're talking about in terms of building this immutable cognitive bias that we've been seeing now, and it's terrible.
Absolutely,
it's terrible.
And I urge everyone, go to Basketball Reference. If you are someone who's like, James Harden's just as good as he always was, go to Basketball Reference and just look at his per game each season, that simple graph that they have for his career. It's a dramatic shift on
that simple
2-point percentage.
Even you will be able to understand that simple
2-point attempts in terms of shots inside the arc. 3-point attempts are down drastically too, and free throws. Everything across the board, every possible shot that James Harden could be taking.
Yeah.
3-point attempts, 2-point attempts, and free throws. They are all down.
And meanwhile, in a season where his usage should have been increased from last year, like he's taken on more of a role, or should have taken on more of a role.
Well, and I think so Harden hasn't looked as good, but I do think he deserves some credit for earlier in the season. I think it was very pick and roll heavy, particularly with Nick Claxton in there. Nick Claxton not being there, the bigs that they have on the team aren't pick and roll bigs. They're pick and pop bigs. Harden deserves some credit for sort of dialing back I dominate the ball to such a degree that everyone else stands around. Now, I don't think the offense is flowing. We've talked about that. Mm-hmm. But he is shooting the ball much less than he ever has in his career, and he's getting to the free throw line much less than he has in his career. His assists are still basically what they were, and his turnovers haven't dramatically increased. They're actually a little bit lower than they have been over his career. So, like, part of what the point we all PPG points per game. We all analyze PPG. Oh, his PPG is down. So many people are having conversation on the streets about his PPG, his points per game. It's really down also because he's just taking fewer shots and he's at the free throw line a lot less.
Can I add one little divergent thought to this?
Yes, please.
When you were
great movie, Divergent.
I am more convinced than ever in the Steve Nash strategy of showing people what they like, showing them the thing. Like, this is going to happen with Cam Thomas again soon. Showing them what like they're all clamoring for, and then realize like, oh, actually, we don't want that, and then taking it off the table again. He's done this so expertly with Nick Claxton. You don't hear anybody being like, "Where's Nick Claxton? He's getting DNP'd now," and like it's maybe not good. He's back in the G League. Who knows where he is? Whatever. But like you don't hear a peep on Nets Twitter about it or anywhere else because like we did see the Nick Claxton experiment play out, and it wasn't super duper attractive.
Well, it's actually the best thing. I mean, the best thing for Nick Claxton would have been if he was averaging 20 and 10. So I shouldn't say it's the best thing for him, but it's actually kind of good that he failed so spectacularly at the beginning. He gets an illness, which stinks, but he goes away, and then he can slowly work himself back into like what he should be. Like Nick Claxton is a guy that should have a long runway in terms of development, and you know he was kind of shoved into the spotlight because Nash wanted to see what he had, and he failed.
I think Nash knew what he had and wanted to be like, here, Nets Nation, see what, behold your Messiah.
This was a direct shot on Twitter.
This was to
how
Twitter.
Amazing is if Nash in a press conference
based on reply guys
turned to camera and said, Twitter, you happy? Yeah. You've ruined our boy, my precious boy.
Yeah.
The Nick Claxton Anon group out there, the Claxtonons.
There's a few of them.
So to assess James Harden so far this year, let's just say the broad statistics: 18, 8.5 assists per game, and 8 rebounds. He's averaging 4.5 turnovers, which really isn't that great, but 2 for 1. basically turnover to assist. He isn't getting to the hole as well. He doesn't have that burst. He obviously isn't getting to the free throw line. We've talked about that. I wonder if his hammies are actually an issue. Like, do you shut him down for a week or two?
Hey.
Like I'm not a doctor, but like, is that it? What's the thing that's going to make his hammies the best? I guess playing basketball is the thing that will help him the most.
Not a doctor, don't know, but the fact that he played back-to-back games to me indicates that like they're not, and played a boatload of minutes, that they're not doing. If there's attention being paid to the hammies, it's not in the play less spectrum side of the spectrum.
So I will say I remember this as a Wizards fan growing up. When Russell Westbrook last year came to the Wizards, he looked awful at the start of the season for the Wizards because he also had hamstring issues. And Russ was going through a lot of different injuries. And he played through it. And by midpoint of the season, he looked like the triple-double monster force that Russell Westbrook is, and played that way through the rest of the year. Whether you like Russ or not, like he looked like what we remember. We talked about with Jeff Green when Jeff Green was on the show, friend of the show, Jefe Verde, Jefe Colton Verde.
Come there, please.
We brought up, I was like, you know, we talked, he's good friends with Russ, and we talked about it. He looks like old Russ. Yeah. He looks like the Russ that we remember from OKC. So Harden, you know, we're 11 games in. I just fear that, like, this is a great player still, but is this the player that we're going to get? You know, is this if it is, then Sean Marks needs to sneak into Kyrie Irving's West Orange home or East Orange and stab him with the vaccine.
Yeah.
Just needs to have it. And like in the scene in Dune when they send in the Seeker into Paul Atreides' room.
Spoilers, come on now, Mike.
Oh, shit, I did this again.
You keep doing this.
But this isn't really a spoiler. Like it's within the first third of the movie. I'm not telling you what happens at the end of Eternals. You know, we know who pops up at the end of the Eternals. I'm not saying it.
You have to be more sensitive to this, Mike, for the people. Jesus.
No, I could say this. They send in a thing to
spoiler alert.
Kill the what? How is that like a spoiler? That's like he's a little prince who people want to murder.
If you're listening to the show and you haven't seen Dune yet, spoiler alert. Watch out, Mike's spoiling. Doing it again, guys. He's doing it again.
Mina Kimes, friend of the show, did tweet out that this really crushed my soul. She said, "I'm just glad you guys that Brian basically stopped Mike from announcing spoilers of Dune before I saw Dune."
Yeah.
And that was crushing to see someone like Mina Kimes say to us, "Hey, Mike, you're an ass." Like, essentially, Mike is a bad person.
Read between the lines. You're an right there. Read between the lines, Mike.
You're right. Not everyone views the same things that I view. You
gave up. I don't watch Ted Lasso, but you gave up the Ted Lasso ending. Like,
what did I give up with Ted Lasso? There's nothing to give up with Ted Lasso.
Someone emailed us.
He plays soccer.
You ruined that for me. You ruined.
I don't even know what I could have given up. I think next week we should do a redraft of the Nets roster. And because I think because Brian and I, our season preview episode was we drafted the Nets roster, him and I taking players back and forth. I wonder how different it would be now.
You have Kevin Durant, but I have LaMarcus Aldridge, so check me.
You do have all the old crusty people. I think I took like Nick Claxton.
We haven't even talked about Paul Millsap, and I feel like a month. Like there's people on this roster who are falling through the cracks, or at least on my roster. I'll say that.
Well, let's do stock up, stock down.
Yeah, we'll do that next week, or I don't know. Are we?
Yeah, I mean, basically, who's the Bitcoin, who's the Ethereum,
yeah,
and then who's like the General Electric stock.
I don't have. How much do I actually need to start paying attention to this? I don't care at all.
To Bitcoin?
To like any of the crypto shit. Like I just cannot.
I mean, it's the future, but if you don't care about the future,
like,
then
not that I don't care about Pokemon, in theory, but it's like, talking about like, oh, Ethereum, it sounds like a Pokemon to me. Like, okay, what's his powers? What does he do? Great, cool. Like, keep it moving. Could be a shampoo. Could be,
Just put all your money in Bitcoin. You're gonna be happy.
Okay.
You're gonna be happy in 5 years. Can I ask you real quick something, Brian?
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Fine.
So Patty Mills, it's kind of glaring when Patty Mills doesn't shoot the ball well because I love this mentality. and I apologize to the Patty Mills Mafia out there, what I'm about to say, and please don't come after me and my family. I understand the thing I'm saying is blasphemous. I love Patty Mills. But because of his confidence and because of his mentality, I'm going to keep taking good shots because if I can keep taking shots, keep taking good shots, I will eventually hit them. And he is shooting a good percentage this year. But it's pretty glaring when he was taking all those shots and he goes 2 for 9 from the field and 1 from 5 from 3. And he kills possessions by missing those shots. Like everyone does when they miss a shot. Should I care about that, or should I be happy that Patty Mills is not afraid to shoot? Well, you know what I mean?
I think what's maybe the takeaway is that Patty's not afraid to take up the mantle of leading the offense of the second unit. But he was never supposed to do that. That wasn't supposed to be his job. He was supposed to be elite spot up shooter guy / combo, somewhat playmaking guard next to Kyrie Irving. Next to, like this is the reason why the Kyrie Irving thing is so triggering. It's because the downstream effects of it are it puts pressure on everybody else. And I think the person who's feeling the pressure the most out of anyone would be Patty Mills, who's then tapped. He's like, "You're basically like Kyrie Irving." He's like, "I'm really not. I'm like, I want to be. Don't get me wrong. I would like that a lot, but I'm not." And I think that's what he's warring with more than like that, because like I don't think he wants to do any dribble drive mid-rangey like shots that he's trying to do. I think he wants to just plug open spot up threes. I think that's what that's what he was thought my job was going to be, and now it's not. And like he's been a good sport in terms of taking on that extra load, but it's not natural. It's not what he's supposed to be doing.
It's like when I interned for Sirius XM NASCAR radio. I was an intern, and then suddenly by the end of the summer, I was producing a weekend roundup show.
Wow.
And I'm like, hey, great. Love the responsibility. Not doing a good job, guys.
Yeah.
Really
I'm
not getting paid.
Yeah.
I am driving down to DC and I'm paying for my own parking, and I'm also not getting a salary, and I'm now doing a show. And I'm not doing a good job. So we should.
That's amazing.
We should. I'm not.
I've never heard that. Did you have like stress dreams about that? That sounds like that sounds like a bad dream for me.
No. It's like one of those things where like I didn't even realize I was producing a show until I was like, oh, I'm actually producing the show.
Wow. And
it wasn't good.
And then
because I also don't know NASCAR.
And it prepared you to produce this masterpiece. so thank goodness.
Kyrie Irving, a perfect transition point, and I appreciate you for bringing it up. So we've had some interesting developments since we last potted. Last week we were kind of living in the glow of Eric Adams, the mayoral-elect in New York City, saying he's going to revisit vaccine mandates. Then he had another interview, which was after we potted, him saying, I can't understand how politicians don't understand this. But he was basically like, the NBA and Kyrie will have to come to a decision, which is like, it's your guys' mandate, which is fine. I support mandates. I'm just saying,
do you think
it is the city's
is
ordinance?
This like, I can't even tell. Like, it's so consistent now that people have not gotten that correct. Like, is it just a way to dodge the question, or like I don't?
Yes, it's a way to dodge the, because what happens is the people asking these questions, and so this was I'll provide context. This Eric Adams interview we're referencing was with Wolf Blitzer, and Wolf is a basketball fan. He's a huge Wizards fan, which is hilarious.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Huge, like he goes to like
Blitzer? Wow.
Like 20 games a year at least.
I love that.
Huge.
I love that.
He'll take like selfies of him at Wizards games. It's so cute, so lovely. So he asked Eric Adams specifically about Kyrie Irving, and Eric Adams said the NBA thing, and Wolf followed up and said, actually, Mr. Mayor, it's the Mr. Mayor-elect, it's the city's policy. And Eric Adams then says, well, the city's not changing their policy, so it's up to the NBA and Kyrie to come to an understanding. Now, people are really hanging on to the fact that Eric Adams said the city isn't changing their policy, which I do want to say one thing, and then we'll get to the Kyrie Irving point. It would be incorrect to assume that the city will never change their policy, because these policies come into place to account for like high points in coronavirus, and the hope is maybe by next spring that we will, more people will be vaccinated, and we will all feel better about coronavirus, and then we can do away with some of these mandates a little bit. That would be the hope. We all should hope that mandates go away at some point, blah, blah, blah. But we're living in this shifting reality where it really does seem like, I don't know if you feel differently, it just doesn't seem like New York City is going to change their Kyrie Irving policy, essentially, right? Like, I don't think anytime soon. It certainly won't change when Eric Adams initially goes into office on January 1 and before the trade deadline, which is mid-February. So we maintain that Kyrie Irving will remain unvaccinated, most likely until forever.
And basically, here's the problem with how these types of situations work. Now both sides are dug in, and there's going to be a perceived win, a symbolic win for either side.
Yes.
And that's where things get stupid and nasty. And so, like, basically, I don't know, I can't speak to whatever Kyrie, but like, you have to imagine that if Kyrie gets the vaccine and comes back, that'll be seen as a win for team vax and blah blah blah. You know it is, but it's stupid. But that's how people operate, unfortunately.
Do you think Kyrie cares about that?
I think he does. I'm just gonna go ahead and say I think he does. Yeah.
So I want to bring up a few data points that we've also gotten. Adrian Wojnarowski on Thursday had said, and we've talked about this a little bit, but that basically teams are calling the Nets. Okay. So we get that. That's obviously coming from Sean Marks, the fact that teams are calling the Nets and they're taking calls on Kyrie Irving, though there's never been even a hint of a trade. Then Mike Scotto, who used to cover the Nets for The Athletic and now I think works for Hoops Hype, had a source story talking to league executives about Kyrie Irving's trade value. And Scotto, via these NBA executives, all the executives are basically like, this is the quote: "For the most part, every front office and coaching staff is scared to death of Kyrie and doesn't want to touch him," one NBA executive told Hoops Hype. Honestly, it might have been 4 teams before this, his refusal to get vaccinated. He's just, and I don't really know what that means. He's a guy that front offices don't trust. Coaches don't want to deal with him. Players like him, which is nice. I think that's a bit of posturing. Like, I think we extrapolate too much from one executive saying that is also kind of like a bullshit circumstance, because let's say that executive is Monty McNair, who runs the Kings. Well, if Monty McNair's owner decides that he wants Kyrie Irving, he's going to force Monty McNair to do that. And also a lot of guys, like, not to bring in Aaron Rodgers, because I think we've all had enough Aaron Rodgers, Kyrie Irving discussion, but you hear a lot of NFL executives sourced reporting saying, oh, this is hurting Aaron Rodgers' trade value. If he actually was put back on the market by the Packers, every team in the NFL would want him. Now, Kyrie's different because he's burned basically every bridge he's walked over. He's demolitioned. Didn't they blow up some bridge in Saving Private Ryan? Wasn't that part of the thing?
Yeah, it was a French bridge, tiny French bridge.
Tiny French Bridge. Isn't that the other name for the movie?
Yeah.
It was good. That Saving Private Ryan was going to be Tiny French Bridge. What a great alternate title. Kyrie is obviously a different case, and we've talked about this before. I still think, Brian, there is trade value for him. Do you think, like, if you are another team in the NBA, I have teams that they could possibly be interested in him. Do you think that there's value to Kyrie Irving, knowing that he will remain unvaccinated, knowing that he's an unreliable person?
It's so tough, and I kind of just go back to the timeline of, to invoke your arch nemesis now, Nick Wright, and how he just kind of came out of nowhere, teleported into the Twitter sphere with a hot take of, like, Kyrie Irving, like, could retire. And that was like, that's insane. That's an insane thing to just put out into the world before we knew anything about any of his stances about whatever. And now it looks like, I don't know, would you put the odds that he retires at like 20%? I mean, it seems plausible now in a way that like it's that it never.
And like initially when you said 20%, I feel like that was low, but then he said specifically, I'm not retiring. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, but his actions are on the retirement pathway right now. He's more towards retirement than not at the moment. I mean, he's not playing basketball, which is super
retirement-y.
Symptomatic of retirement.
Symptomatic, yeah.
But he, so I don't, it's, to answer your question, I don't have a real ready answer other than like everything that seemed impossible with him just seems on the table now all of a sudden. Like literally everything, the whole gamut. So whether it's retirement or somebody offers him a max contract next year and he comes back and plays for
like
Charlotte,
Croatia, like he goes to some team in Belgrade.
Yeah,
like, couldn't you see Kyrie doing the stuff on Marbury Path?
Absolutely.
And just ending up in China or somewhere in Eastern Europe and playing
Aviv?
for $100 million a year. The thing about Jerusalem is they're very pro-vax.
They're very vaxxy. Yeah, that's not going to jive.
So he wouldn't be allowed to play in Israel, but Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
For sure.
They're lax. But my point is, like, we could speculate. I think ultimately somebody will offer him deferring to Raja Bell, somebody will offer him a contract. Does he get let's say he doesn't play this whole year, just as one of the many, in our flow chart of possibilities here, one of the many, doesn't play this year, is looking to play next year for a team that doesn't have any mandates. Does some random, I don't know, pick a team come up and offer him that 4-year contract, 5-year contract?
The Knicks.
Right? I mean, well, not the Knicks because they have ostensibly might have a mandate still.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Miami. I mean, like, whoever,
Yeah, I think a team does come through. I mean, I just want to, this is real quick. So Danny LaRue, he works for The Athletic. He's also on, what's the show with Nate Duncan? They talk about Dunked On.
I think.
Danny writes also for The Athletic and sort of looked at like what the salary cap space for teams next year will be. And these are the teams that will have significant cap space. The Detroit Pistons, the Orlando Magic, the Spurs could have decent amount of cap space, anywhere from like 18 to $30 million. And the Memphis Grizzlies we're going to have like 15 to 18. So there's not a ton of cap space next offseason. Like, what is Kyrie Irving's contract going to be? It could not be a max contract.
Yeah, but my feeling is like people move stuff around all the time. I mean,
I understand that. Yeah, but those are teams that it would be tough for me to see him. Like Orlando makes sense, but they're actually doing it. They have a nice thing with Cole Anthony and Jalen Suggs, who they just drafted, and they've paid Markelle Fultz, and he's going to come back from injury at some point. If I'm Orlando, I'm like, I'd rather just have Cole Anthony, who seems like a delightful person, than Kyrie Irving. The thing I will point out is, but even before I get to like the hypothetical teams that could want Kyrie Irving, what's going to happen is if the Nets get serious about trading Kyrie, usually the Nets keep things pretty buttoned up, right? Like we don't hear about the big moves that happen until they happen for the Nets. The disadvantage that they have in this situation is I would imagine any team that wants to trade for Kyrie Irving must have a conversation with Kyrie before they get him and say, hey, do you want to play basketball? Would you play for us? Would you sign an extension if you did, in fact, want to play basketball? And all those type of things. And by having those conversations, I think it leaks out in some way before we get to a possible trade. Like, I think there's going to be this whole slow drip of news saying the Nets are actually considering offers for Kyrie. The next one is, hey, it's these teams. And then it's, hey, these teams want to talk to Kyrie. Hey, they did talk to Kyrie, and then this is the information they found out. Like, I don't think it's going to be a sneaky trade. I may be wrong.
I'm also just thinking about the world in which he comes back. And, like, also, even in that world, there's, like, this very interesting relationship that we have to have with Kyrie Irving, which is, like, let's say he comes back and, like, pulls a calf muscle or something. It'd be like, well, now all of your sympathy chips, or you've used all of your sympathy chips. Like, well, cool, you shouldn't have played or not played professional basketball for 6 weeks and
play flag football, touch football, right? Was it touch or flag?
It was touch, the lowest form.
I will say, again, there's been a lot of Aaron Rodgers, Kyrie Irving comparisons. Aaron Rodgers looking like such an idiot really helps Kyrie Irving.
I've been totally checked out on the Aaron Rodgers thing, so I don't even pay
it was brutal.
He said some
It was brutal, the amount of
cliff notes. What do I need to know top level?
He said, so he lied to to reporters 2 months ago when he was in training camp and they asked if he was vaccinated, and he said he was immunized, and then quickly talked about something else. Saying he was immunized, people took it as him saying he was vaccinated because they said, "Are you vaccinated?" He said, "I'm immunized."
I would have immediately picked up on that. That's
yeah, right. And someone did. Michael Smith, who used to be at ESPN, who now works for Peacock and NBC Universal. He has like one of those PTI style shows. Literally, when Aaron Rodgers said that, there's clips of him on his show saying, "Hey, we should not trust him because he's saying a word that doesn't mean that you're vaccinated."
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers wasn't wearing masks all that time around media, which technically I guess he should have been. He wasn't wearing masks around teammates, which he should have been if he wasn't vaccinated. And then he goes on Pat McAfee's podcast, YouTube, radio show, to all those things. And he says he consulted with Joe Rogan about vaccination procedures.
Smart.
He sent the NFL 500 pages of research about why he didn't need to get didn't need to get vaccinated. That the woke mob was after him. That the NFL sent some stooge to the Packers to explain why people need to get vaccinated. Like he said all the things. He didn't want to get vaccinated because he didn't want to become sterile.
Oh my Lord.
So he basically, it was anti-vax bingo. That Aaron Rodgers was saying, and I laugh because Brian and I'll just put it on me. We were so frustrated with how Kyrie handled his situation by basically not saying anything.
In hindsight,
if he said this stuff, then Kyrie may never play basketball again.
Yeah.
Kyrie was smarter to just basically lie and not be fully honest and
not go mask off with the deep state conspiracy that's surely lurking underneath.
Okay, but I do think Aaron Rodgers has helped Kyrie because it does lead to some appreciation for Kyrie to at least have the sanity to know I shouldn't say all the things I think, right? Where Aaron Rodgers is just saying what he thinks. Okay.
That's a weird state of sanity to be like, I know that what I think is crazy to hear from when other people hear it, so I can't talk about it. That's a weird, but it is true to me.
It is true. Yeah. It's a truth. Okay, so and finally, now at the 50-minute mark of our podcast, here are the teams that I think would want to trade for Kyrie Irving. And I've talked about this before. You look for the dumb teams and the desperate teams, the dumb owners and the desperate owners. And we're beginning our thirst. We used to have a thirst rankings for the trade market, which we'll bring back when we get closer to the trade deadline. This is a version of the thirst rankings, Kyrie Irving trades. Look at the NBA standings and look at what teams are really not doing very well right now. There are 3 that stand out pretty clearly. The biggest, blaringest one that I've talked about before, but it needs to be emphasized again, is the New Orleans Pelicans. Brian, do you know what record the New Orleans Pelicans have this year?
Not off the top of my head.
They are 1-10.
Oh, oof.
1-10. They are sporting the worst record in the NBA so far. There are 3 teams that have 1 win this year. They're the only team with double-digit losses. I mean, that's a creation of the schedule. The Pelicans are a team that we know has intense pressure, it seems, around David Griffin, who runs the team from a personnel side. They just brought in Willie Green to coach this team. Zion Williamson looks like he's playing defensive tackle for the Packers and not supposed to be like the ball-dominant wing forward for the Pelicans. The moves that they made this offseason, Jonas Valanciunas has been good so far. Devontae Graham has actually been okay, but he has a lot of volume for someone who's, again, they basically swapped out Lonzo Ball for. There are a lot of the young guys haven't stepped up at all. Tomas Satoransky, who they got in the Lonzo Ball swap, Satoransky doesn't play basketball really for them at all. Jackson Hayes, a really high draft pick for them in, the Zion draft as well. He doesn't play for them really at all either. This is an extremely disappointing team. It seems like Brandon Ingram has basically stayed the same. He's been good, but he's not he's really just not that great. And Zion, we have no clue when he's going to be back. They are a desperate team. And when you have a desperate team with a desperate ownership who is ultra afraid that Zion may leave earlier than any rookie of his level has ever left a franchise, they are the perfect team to attack if you're Sean Marks. And Sean Marks has a relationship with Trajan Langdon, who's the assistant GM there. It is very easy for Sean Marks to call up the New Orleans Pelicans and be like, hey, you guys suck. We have a player who's really good, who fits your team. I've talked about this before. It would have 3 Duke guys on the team, 3 Duke phenoms, and Brandon Ingram, Zion, and Kyrie Irving. Now, I've been trying to figure this out, Brian, and I've got a delicious piece of information for you that could really make an intriguing trade. I think you're going to like it.
Okay.
So I was under the belief that if you sign an extension with the team you're currently with, that you can't be traded within like 8 months or something, like 8 or 6 months. It's why the Nets couldn't have traded Spencer Dinwiddie 2 seasons ago when they signed him to an extension. Jonas Valanciunas signed an extension with the Pelicans. But apparently, and I've been reading this and I would like someone to confirm it. So netspod@gmail.com. He signed it for just the highest dollar amount that he could that still makes him tradable right now. There's some amount of money that if you don't sign for more than your previous salary, you're still a tradable contract. Jonas Valanciunas has been a guy that I've loved dearly for a long time.
I didn't know that. You never told me that.
Burly, tough center, averaging 20 points a game and 14 rebounds, Brian. What's the Nets' biggest problem this year?
Gosh, let's think.
Of vaccinations and then rebounding.
Yeah, sure.
Now, Jonas actually maybe is pretty good, but if you're a desperate team like the Pelicans, if you get Kyrie Irving and you have to give up Jonas Valanciunas, I think you feel pretty good about that. If you believe that Kyrie's going to come back. I offer up, and there's a lot of salary mixing and matching that needs to be done. Jonas Valanciunas, Tomas Satoransky's expiring deal, and Jackson Hayes, because you need that salary, and Jackson Hayes doesn't play, for Kyrie Irving. The Nets get their 30-minute per game center who can be a big burly dude, who can really soak up those rebounds. You can actually throw to him, get offense out of him in the low post. He can be the pick and roll center that really fits with Harden because he can also hit threes now. He's shooting 58% from 3 on 2 attempts per game. Wow. Now that's not sustainable, but that's pretty good as a center. He's an excellent free throw shooter. So you're not like he's at the end of games, you're not taking him off the floor unless if it's because of switching problems. And you send Kyrie packing to a team that is ultra desperate. I can't express to you how desperate the Pelicans are. Now, to think that a year ago that you're only going to get Jonas Valanciunas and some salary filler for Kyrie Irving would have been galling.
Yeah, inconceivable.
Let me ask you, Brian, is it still galling? What's the gall meter?
It's really not galling. That's the gall meter in terms of gall. If we already like sectioned off gall, which is in a scale of 1 to 10,
Gall Godot.
It's like I think you enter gall territory about like at a 3 out of 10 or something, and it's not that. It's not that low. It's not galling in terms of like, is it possible? Do I like it? Does it offend me?
Yeah.
So, but it is disgusting. Grand scheme of things, it's not great, and I'm even having to have the conversation makes my skin crawl a little bit. So, but like if we're really in that situation, I like it.
Yes.
I think you've convinced me. If it's between Kyrie not playing and watching him bugger off in the offseason and this, obviously this.
So and there's all these advantages to this trades for the Nets, and I can get to the Pelicans part, but this is a Nets podcast, so you guys can who cares if you're a Pelicans fan listening to this?
Go find another go find a
you
Pelicans
get Kyrie
podcast.
Irving.
Yeah,
you get Kyrie, a guy who's 35-5. You get Kyrie Irving, okay? And you only do this if you know that Kyrie's not getting vaccinated and he's not coming back. For the Nets, I think there's a word where Tomas Satoransky is like a guy on this team, but he's an expiring contract. and you can lower his bill, or you can use
assessing this like it's actually going to happen. Oh, you're really bought in on this.
You can move Satoransky in a different deal for another player. But just look at Jonas Valanciunas for a second. So your starting lineup is Harden, Joe Harris, KD, Valanciunas, and whether it's Bruce Brown, whether it's Patty Mills subbing in, Blake Griffin as at the 4, so you just kind of go bigger at times. The good thing about Valanciunas is he's enough of a three-point shooter now that he's actually become a stretch 5 in a way. Now, he doesn't shoot the 3 that much, but he's good enough at it. I think last year he shot like 38% or something from a 3. I'm pulling it up now. He shot 37%. The year before that, 35% on a 3-point every game, but that's a respectable shot. You have the 30-minute per game center, an elite rebounder, which you need on this team, and it allows you to not have to rely on LaMarcus Aldridge so much. And what it does is, and Brian, we've talked about this, I don't think Nick Claxton's meant to be a long-term future piece for this team, unless if he dramatically pulls his game out of his tulkus and starts playing really well. You can then move Nick Claxton plus Tomas Satoransky's contract and something else for a really good backup guard piece that you may need, or another wing defender. I love DeAndre Bembry, but you can elevate. So it actually opens up more moves for you if you bring in a real center like Valanciunas. And Valanciunas helps you against the Bucks. It helps you against the 76ers. It helps you against the Nuggets if you see them in the finals. Helps you against the Lakers. He's a guy you can rely upon in that spot. It lowers the tax bill on this team dramatically, which is going to matter if the Nets want to keep more fringe players on their roster that they can't pay the minimum. Because Joe Tsai seems to basically said, hey, we're going to keep our stars, and Joe Harris and everyone else really can't be on this team anymore because I can't keep paying tax money. So there's all these advantages that you get better role players on this team and all that stuff. And for the Pelicans, they get Kyrie Irving. So I love it. I absolutely love it.
You clearly love it. You've written some compelling fanfic, and and you've done some good world building. I hope it comes true for you, Mike. Do you think it'll happen? You seem like you've convinced yourself.
The only thing I don't know, because the thing I don't know is that the Pelicans traded for Jonas Valanciunas for a specific reason, right? Like if they still had Steven Adams, who they wanted to get rid of, it would have been pretty easy to get Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe from them for Kyrie Irving. Now, if you're the Nets, I actually don't hate that fully because I like Steven Adams a lot. Valanciunas is a better player than Steven Adams, and they wanted him for a reason. The thing is, this becomes one of those pressure situations where if the owner of the team finds out that they could have Kyrie Irving and the guy they have to give up is a center who no one cares about, no fan is going to a game to see Jonas Valanciunas. The owner's going to say, I know how much you like the center, but we're going to get Kyrie Irving. We're going to get the anti-vax Kyrie Irving here in New Orleans, and he's going to play basketball for us, and he's going to make Zion Williamson happy. Mm-hmm. Jonas Valanciunas ain't making Zion Williamson happy.
It's a bold move.
That's my fake trade that I'm going to hold to my grave.
Good. Love it, Mike. You did it. You did a great job.
Well, thank you all for listening. I'll keep bringing one fake trade per an episode. Yeah, we'll eventually get Kyrie Irving to the Lakers at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. If you are listening right now, go to iTunes or go to Apple Podcast.